Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update on social media. Thank you as always for joining us this week. So much going on. It's hard to keep up with President Trump, but Judicial Watch may actually be doing it. This is going to be an action-packed Judicial Watch weekly update with all the litigation and fighting for the rule of law that Judicial Watch is doing. Getting documents out of the crazed Biden HHS. You're not going to believe, well, probably you will believe, but the extremism that we've uncovered there. New litigation potential over election rolls. New outrageous demands from the D.C. police to turn over to Judicial Watch under FOIA law the body cam videos from their police officers of January 6th. And of course, we've got the president's speech to talk about. So much going on that I can't even get into it. Plus, believe it or not, we're battling the Trump administration for documents about abuse by the Biden administration, specifically with USAID. So let's begin at the beginning, which is the president's speech and where we are in the Trump presidency. Now, I was not here last week. You may recall I was doing my update from a secret location, but I was running a meeting. In my spare time, I'm the president of the Council for National Policy. Here's the tweet that described what we were doing last week. I'm honored to also be president of the Council for National Policy. And we just, this was last week, there was a tremendous private meeting bringing together hundreds of the country's conservative movement leaders and supporters. I can report complete unity behind and excitement for the record pace and substance of real Donald Trump's reforms. Now, admittedly, we're all conservatives, right? There, so maybe we're not exactly representative of where everyone is in the country, but we're a pretty good selection of regular Americans, obviously conservative movement leaders. You know, and with Republicans, sometimes we're all not that happy with what some Republicans are doing. But people are completely astonished by how quickly President Trump has been able to move to reform government and cut government through his executive orders. We're hopeful that Congress gets on the ball and starts to save money, cut government, and further curtail inflationary pressures. Indeed, President Trump's deregulatory efforts may be as significant to curtailing inflation as anything Congress is able to do. Because when you increase the cost of doing business through needless and burdensome government regulations, you increase inflation. So when you have a major event like the CMP event that I was running last week of conservative movement leaders, and you know, we had public officials speak, it was really incredible. And you have leaders who have been around, some of whom have been around for decades. Well, I've been around for decades too, but decades longer than me, talking about how Trump's administration already is the most significant policy-wise in the modern era. It's comparable to Reagan in terms of its impact on the government here in Washington, D.C. already, and he's only been in office for, what, 40 or 50 days. And so with that in mind, you know, I get back to reality at Judicial Watch after running that big meeting for the Council for National Policy. And of course, the president has his major speech, his first major national speech before a joint session of Congress the other day. And what was the reaction of the parties? Well, obviously, the Republicans are supportive. And the Democrats actually threatened him. At least one Democrat threatened him, Al Green. Let's go to that.
We won the popular vote by big numbers and won counties in our country. And won counties in our country, 2,700 to 525, on a map that reads almost completely red for Republican. Now, for the first time in modern history, more Americans believe that our country is headed in the right direction than the wrong direction. In fact, it's an astonishing record, 27-point swing, the most ever. Likewise, small business optimism saw its single largest one-month gain ever recorded, a 41-point jump.
Members are directed to uphold and maintain decorum in the House and to cease any further disruptions. That's your warning. Members are engaging in willful and continuing breach of decorum, and the chair is prepared to direct the Sergeant-at-Arms to restore order to the joint session.
So there you had Al Green, notoriously far-left member of the Democratic caucus there in the House, essentially threaten the President of the United States from the floor of the House. He knows what he's doing when he brandishes his cane like a weapon towards the President. That's a threat. It's further incitement, as far as I'm concerned, for violence. He eventually was removed by the Sergeant of Arms, their security team. And I'm tired of it. There's got to be serious consequences for this threatening behavior, this undercurrent of violence the left is trying to foment with the targeting of Trump. And that you would think he'd be apologetic, because the Republicans and 10 Democrats actually voted to censure him just the other day. And this is what the left-wing gang, as I call them, the commies are going to commie, did at the during the censorship reading, where he has supposedly, well, what happens is he's supposed to come down to the well of the House up front and be censured. It's a negative thing. You know, if you're a member of Congress, you really don't want it to happen. This is how they reacted.
The House has resolved that Representative Al Green be censured, that Representative Al Green forthwith present himself in the well of the House of Representatives for the pronouncement of censure, and that Representative Al Green be censured with public reading of this resolution by the Speaker. The House had come to order. The House had come to order.
So all these lefties got together with him and started singing a civil rights song. As again, he raises what I consider something he's using as a substitute for a weapon, his cane. When he walked down, he wasn't using his cane to walk, he was holding it. And I'm not being fooled here, and you shouldn't be fooled either. He knows exactly what he's doing when he brandishes that cane at the president and then raises it up as he's being punished for his misconduct. As far as I'm concerned, I know the Republicans now are talking about stripping him of committee, of any committee responsibilities, taking him off committees. But if you're threatening the president from the floor, isn't that worth being expelled over in the House? Isn't that substantial enough a violation of the rules of the House to be thrown out of the House of Representatives? I think there should be a debate about that. Al Green should be subject to a resolution for expulsion, and let people come down on one side or the other whether it's right to threaten a president of the United States from the floor of the House in such an obviously, though coded, violent manner. And it's time after time these leftist congressmen are out there trying to incite and target violence against President Trump. A relatively new member of the House, Congressman Crockett, I believe her last name is Crockett, right? Was on TV the other day using inflammatory language to, again, incite and justify violence against the President of the United States. Let's play that.
Unfortunately, we have someone that is occupying the White House, and as far as I'm concerned, he is an enemy to the United States. He swore an oath just like the rest of us. But right now, when you are literally putting us at risk, all because of what? Because you want to convince your followers that you should be a dictator too, that you should never leave the White House because you don't believe that elections should take place. I don't really understand what is going on, and I don't know what it's going to take to get people to.
How would you interpret what she said? If someone is a dictator and an enemy of the United States, all bets are off, right, in dealing with them. They know what the consequences that that language is. Again, President Trump was nearly murdered twice. The second time by a crazed leftist. The first time, it's amazing how we supposedly don't know anything about the first attempted assassination of President Trump. And these leftists are constantly out there using language, as I say, to justify violence against him and to incite and target violence at him. And so there's got to be accountability and pushback on it. It's not normal language. It's not normal. I mean, you can say you don't think the president is fit for all. You could say all sorts of things within the range of normal that isn't designed to create an atmosphere of violence against him and his supporters. You know, of course, they tried to jail him. There's got to be accountability for that. I mean, the good news is he is doing what he can within the law to protect the nation from those who abused him and his civil rights. Perkins Coie, who was the law firm for the Clinton campaign, who was notoriously connected to paying for and pushing and disguising the money for the Steele operation to smear and generate false allegations of Russia against Trump. They paid for the Steele dossier. They partnered with the Obama FBI to pay Christopher Steele to write the dossier, the sham dossier targeting Trump. And Trump's view on all this is like, what are these people who did this to me? Why hasn't there been any accountability? And wait, why do they have security clearances? How can they be trusted if this is what they do? And security clearances really can quickly be removed by the President of the United States, certainly other officials too. And so he's taken steps to remove the security clearances this week of anyone associated with Perkins Coie, and he talked about it in an executive order during the signing of the related executive order.
Sir, your administration has made it a priority both to end lawfare and the weaponization of government, and also to hold those who have engaged in lawfare accountable. One of the law firms that has been involved in that is called Perkins Coie. That's also a law firm that has engaged in unlawful DEI practices. This executive order will suspend
and I've watched it take place.
This executive order will suspend security clearances and access to certain federal resources for that law firm, and also launch a holistic review of unlawful DEI practices at some of the nation's largest law firms.
This is an absolute honor to sign. What they've done is it's just terrible. It's weaponization. You could say weaponization against a political opponent, and it should never be allowed to happen again. And you're looking at about 15 different firms?
That or more, sir, yes.
Okay.
I just love it. I just love it. And he was confronted at a reporter for supposedly targeting his political opponents, and he had an excellent comeback. Let's watch this video.
Mr. President, what do you say to people who worry that targeting an individual firm or individuals who aren't Jack Smith for his actions?
I've been targeted for 4 years, longer than that. So you don't tell me about targeting. I was the target of corrupt politicians for 4 years, and then 4 years after that. So don't talk to me about targeting.
You know, And he will be targeted again. He's already being targeted. They're just biding their time, figuring out how they can get it done. They're not going to stop. They're going to target people around him. They're going to target Elon Musk. They've already been targeting Musk. As I say, they've been threatening violence against him. I mean, you have lawfare and then, practically speaking, political warfare in the dangerous sense of the word against President Trump. So I'm glad he's calling him out and doing what he can, and I just hope the Justice Department or other federal law enforcement or any other appropriate agency at the state level investigate this corruption. Expose it fully. I mean, we're going to court to expose it. We've been doing it for years. Sometimes we've been alone defending Trump. And I'm only slightly exaggerating. I mean, there was a time in this town where all of that lawfare was seen as appropriate against Trump. Mueller was appointed, remember? And all the Republicans said, well, Mueller is a respectable man. We got to trust everything he's saying. Oh, the FBI, we're just going to let the investigation run its course. And I said, no! And we exposed it as corrupt. We said there's no basis for it. The whole special counsel operation was, we didn't say lawfare at the time, abuse of power, presidential harassment, a coup. And now everyone understands it, or anyone who's honest understands it. Heck, he was elected despite being literally convicted by these coosters or the coup cabal. The anti-Republicans, and I use Republican with the small r, they don't like constitutional republics, especially ours in our Constitution, so they want to blow it up by targeting their political opposition through extra-constitutional means in a way never done before in American history. Now, there's low-intensity lawfare going on in the courts as the president exercises his constitutional prerogatives as president to try to curtail and control government spending. One of the more outrageous restrictions on that effort came from a judge here in, I think it was Washington, D.C. Yeah, it was Judge Ali here in Washington, D.C., who essentially ordered the president to spend $2 billion, or his administration to spend $2 billion on foreign nationals. Because he said the president can't restrict it or even pause it, including money for the United Nations. And it was a hijacking of presidential power in a way I've never really seen before. I can't believe a federal judge, you know, I know they're leftists and such, but you think they got enough understanding of the way our Constitution works and the separation of powers work to not to dare to do this. But, you know, all bets are off when it comes to Trump. So he was forcing Trump to spend $2 billion on corrupt foreign operations like the United Nations. And the president went to the Supreme Court and said, you got to stop this. This money goes out the door, we'll never get it again. And the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, said, no, we're going to leave it in place. And it was a terrible decision in my view, or at least the result was terrible, because the majority really didn't explain itself. It was incoherent. And who was in the majority? Disappointingly, to put it charitably and mildly, Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett. And Justice Alito and the other justices, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh, and Justice Thomas, dissented. And Alito wrote quite a powerful dissent. And I think it's worth sharing with you. You can read the full opinion. It's only a few pages online. We'll provide a link to it at the Supreme Court website. And Justice Alito really ripped into the majority and really highlighted the threat to our constitutional republic caused by these rogue left-wing activist judges. Now, Judge Ali is the lower court judge who ordered President Trump to spend money. Basically, he's not only taking over the executive branch function of spending money, but also foreign policy, because this is money that impacts foreign policy. The president's commander-in-chief. He's the guy who represents us on foreign policy. And this is the lead of Justice Alito's dissent, a powerful dissent. Does a single district court judge, a district court judge is a federal court judge at the basic level, who likely lacks jurisdiction, have the unchecked, let me start over again. Does a single district court judge who likely lacks jurisdiction have the unchecked power to compel the government of the United States to pay out and probably lose forever $2 billion, $2 billion taxpayer dollars? The answer to that question should be an emphatic no, but a majority of this court apparently thinks otherwise. I am stunned. And later, and I encourage you to read the full thing, because they couldn't even be under the law. They weren't even supposed to be before this judge. They were in the wrong, literally in the wrong court. It's essentially a contract dispute. You owe us money, we want it. How is that resolved in any court of law? By forcing a party who objects to pay the money immediately. But that's what happened. Money to foreign entities. There's something else I wanted to read here. And he talks about what the administration, Judge Alito wrote, about what the administration was forced to do when faced with this hijacking of its core constitutional powers by this rogue judge. With nowhere else to turn and the deadline fast approaching, this is on page 3, the government asked this court to intervene. At the last moment, the Chief Justice issued an administrative stay. And I talked about that yesterday. It was last week. There was a pause to this ruling initially. Unfortunately, a majority has now undone that stay. As a result, the government must apparently pay the $2 billion post-haste, not because the law requires it, but simply because a district court so ordered. As the nation's highest court, we have a duty to ensure that the power entrusted to federal judges by the Constitution is not abused. Today, the court fails to carry out that responsibility. And he concludes as follows. And he goes through the various reasons under, and you should read it, because I encourage you to read the Alito dissent, because it describes the processes by which the left are challenging Trump's executive orders, and how the law is supposed to, and the process under law that's supposed to take place in order for those challenges to succeed. So when you see, well, so-and-so sued and a court issued an injunction or a TRO or whatever the nature of it, Justice Alito explains what's supposed to be happening and what actually is happening in many of these cases. So by looking at what happened in this case, you have an idea of what's happening in these other cases. And frankly, it all further highlights the audacity of these other judges in their anti-Trump rulings. And Justice Alito closes out. Today, the court makes a most unfortunate misstep that rewards an act of judicial hubris and imposes a $2 billion penalty on American taxpayers. The district court has made plain its frustration with the government, and respondents raised serious concerns about non-payment for completed work. But the relief ordered is quite simply too broad, let me go to the next page, too extreme a response. A federal court has many tools to address a party's supposed nonfeasance. Self-aggrandizement of its jurisdiction is not one of them. I would chart a different path than the court does today, so I must respectfully dissent. Aggrandizement, self-aggrandizement by a judge. What that means is the judge was exercising a power he didn't have on a matter over which he had no jurisdiction. That's a pretty serious point from a sitting Supreme Court justice, even if he is in dissent. Now, does this mean that Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett are, in the end, going to approve what happened here? No. I mean, the most charitable interpretation is they don't like to have to make decisions before the record below is complete. But I'm not persuaded that letting someone be forced to spend $2 billion, you're a daylight and a dollar short in terms of the abuse of a lower court judge. So you just can't let it be fully complete, because it essentially hands a victory to the other side. I mean, oftentimes when, because Judicial Watch can seek immediate relief sometimes in matters, right? Temporary restraining orders or preliminary injunctions. The challenge with doing that legally is that it requires the court to almost make an immediate ruling on the merits. Now, again, I'm a non-lawyer, so take it for what it's worth, but this is my impression of it. So you can go in there, seek immediate relief, and with the barest debriefing, expect the court to rule for you. And you could lose. And if you lose, even if you pursue the lawsuit further, you're likely to lose again, because the court has largely made the decision already. So the mirror of that is they rush into court, ask a court to order a president of the United States or his appointees to spend money abroad. And with zero briefing, practically speaking, and a rush timeline, not only does the district court let it happen, the Supreme Court lets it happen. And so I'm sorry, even if there's the conservative justices, Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, and Justice Barrett come in later and say, well, that was not the way it was supposed to go. Well, a lot of good that is, because the damage is done. We've lost the $2 billion that shouldn't have been spent. Do you think we're going to be able to claw it back? Of course not. So this was a miscarriage of justice. And it's concerning because a judge hijacked powers, or took on powers, stole powers that are not available to him under the Constitution of the United States. Self-government means, consent of the government means we elect the president, we don't elect judges, to make decisions on foreign policy, including money, to make sure it's being spent correctly and not at odds with our interests and not in a fraudulent manner. And the idea that someone can rush into court and prevent that from happening within minutes. But on the other hand, he's winning some and losing some. There's like, I think, 100 lawsuits now against Trump over his reform efforts. A judge just today ruled, you might think it's an obvious decision, but it required weeks of litigation, just ruled that Treasury Department employees of President Trump can access Treasury Department data. That's right, the left was going in there to suggest and asking a court, and in fact, one court even broadly prevented even the Treasury Secretary from accessing Treasury data. They had to back down from that. But this is where we are, where a federal court judge has to say, yes, the president's officials can access agency data at which they work, at the agency at which they work. So he's got to keep on keeping on. And, let's hope we get more judges who state the obvious, presidents can be president. That's the argument here before the judges, or many of the judges. Can the president be president? Can President Trump be president? Meaning exercise the powers and responsibilities and obligations, duties of his power related to his powers under the Constitution, Article 2. The chief executive, the power of the chief executive function resides with the President of the United States, not the judiciary. Now, does it mean he's not subject to the checks and balances of the Article III courts and Congress? Of course not. But here you have people coming in and trying to stop something in a way that's outside the law. And it's a threat to our republic. It's a threat to our self-government because it requires judges to come in and substitute their will, their sheer political will, and exercise a raw judicial power and take away our right to self-government. So we'll keep on watching that. We'll intervene where we can, monitor what's happening. We've got our FOIA operations up and running in ways that we've never done before, just to track everything that's been going on, especially the left's attempts to thwart the rule of law. And of course, we're not forgetting about the Lawfare. And as I mentioned last week, and I think it's worth reiterating, we were in court last week against Fani Willis's lawyers, and it was a really yet another extraordinary moment in terms of forcing accountability on this local district attorney, Fulton County, a local Democrat elected there, who single-handedly has been trying to jail and filed a case which is still over, is still hanging over President Trump's head to try to throw him in jail. And I talked about it in a quick video I did earlier this week.
Hey, so Judicial Watch attorneys were back in Fulton County last week arguing against Fani Willis's lawyers for access to information about her collusion with the Pelosi January 6th operation. Remember, she first denied in our lawsuit having any records. In fact, she never showed up in court to answer our lawsuit. That's why she was ordered to pay $22,000 in attorney's fees and costs to Judicial Watch recently. Last week, after arguing they had no records, and then later arguing they had some records, they confirmed they had 212 pages of records showing what looks to be collusion with the January 6th committee. Of course, they don't want to give any of those records to the American people. The court ordered her office to turn the records over to him so he could make sure they're being withheld lawfully. But in the end, they were caught red-handed, providing false information about their collusion with the January 6th committee to get Trump. They were forced to pay us money, and on top of that, they don't want to turn over the underlying documents. So this scandal continues, and Judicial Watch's heavy lifting will continue in court, though, to try to get the full truth about this awful abuse targeting President Trump.
So this is on top of Fani Willis being essentially thrown off the case because of her conflicts of interest because of her using tax money to pay her boyfriend to go after Trump. And then she follows up with this misconduct related to her handling of this simple FOIA request. And the reason we now know it's not simple is because she didn't want to admit, her office didn't want to admit to coordinating their Get Trump effort with the Democrats in Congress up here in Washington, D.C., the Pelosi gang running the January 6th committee. And now there are 212 pages of documents they didn't tell us about for months and months and months. And of course, they don't want to turn over any of the records to us. So thankfully, the court said, well, at least I'm going to look at them to see if there's any significant or legitimate privilege. And here's a little snippet from the court hearing in that regard.
Have I said things that leave either side with a lack of clarity as to what's happening next? Because I don't mean for that. I know it's a little bit amorphous because you want some time, Mr. Monroe, to consult with your client and flesh out, here's what I, meaning plaintiff petitioner, would like to see in this affidavit describing how the search was conducted. I'll enter an order that says I'm taking this under the 212 pages in camera to review that. So that's in the record. It's in the transcript right now, but that ought to be demarcated on this date. County attorney, you got 4 days to bring me the documents, or 48 hours, or whatever it is. And then we'll all know where those are. Because if I get distracted by something else that maybe happened in 2024 and there's someone sitting in jail, then you'd be able to say, Judge, you've been sitting on only 212 pages for a month. That's, 12 hours a page. Let's go. And I'll say, you're right. I got to turn back to that. But at least there'll be that marker saying, here's where we are in the process.
Well, I'm glad I saw that again. I didn't realize he had ordered her to turn him over within 4 days. So right now, that court has the records that we want, right? So we're going to have to still litigate over whether we get the records, whether the search was appropriate. This is now the 5th search they conducted in order to get records. And this is why we've asked for a special master, which would be a court-appointed individual who would oversee and be in part responsible for making sure the search is appropriate, among other issues. And we still don't have a clue as to how they searched or where they searched and why they keep on finding records every time they do a new search. And plus, she didn't show up in court to answer our lawsuit. As far as I'm concerned, she waived all these privileges. You don't show up, you lose. Literally, she's already lost. And this is quite the scandal. And of course, Congress has these emails, or at least they ought to have any communications. And there needs to be an investigation as to where those records are. And if they are not there, meaning they've been deleted, I hope there's consequences. And that's up to Speaker Johnson and his team to figure that out. I mean, right now, we are doing more than any other entity, and more successfully at this point, to hold Fani Willis accountable to the rule of law. Your Judicial Watch. So our team of lawyers, Mr. Monroe, our local lawyer, Russ Nobile, our team, Paul, and everyone else here in Washington, D.C. that runs our legal department, I'm honored to be represented as president of Judicial Watch, the corporate plaintiff in this regard. We've got a great team. And we want Congress to follow our lead. We want the Justice Department to follow our lead. We want Georgia officials to follow our lead over this cover-up in Fulton County. I mean, Judicial Watch is happy to do the heavy lifting. It's what we're here for, right? But isn't it outrageous that we're the ones doing it? That we're the ones figuring out that they were hiding collusion records? Congress has been asking for these records. They've gotten nowhere. They've literally gotten nowhere. So more needs to be done, and your Judicial Watch will continue to hold not only Fani Willis, but the other co-conspirators in their plot, the Democratic left-wing plot to destroy our republic by trying to jail Trump and worse. Man, there is so much going on. I'm kind of hungry, so that's one of the reasons I'm a little bit angrier than normal today. It's not because things are worse, it's just because I'm hungry. But I was in court, again, as client for Judicial Watch, and Jim Peterson was representing us today. We're in federal court before Judge Reggie Walton here in the District of Columbia. And across the room from us was a lawyer for the Trump administration, a federal government lawyer who came in and argued on behalf of the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, why Judicial Watch and the American people shouldn't gain access to the details of a grant the USAID made to an entity in Gaza to the tune of $7 million and counting. They don't want to tell us the name, what the grant was for, what they were expected to do, who they were expected to help, none of those details. And this is a position first generated or created under the Biden administration last year when we first started asking for this record and suing for these records in court. And then just recently, the Trump administration ratifies it by saying, oh yeah, this is our legal position. We can't get information about who they're helping in Gaza. Now, what is our concern about that? It's because USAID money and humanitarian money generally from the West, it's notoriously everyone who's been watching the situation, has any expertise in the area, knows that that money goes to help Hamas and terrorists generally. Now, does it mean it doesn't help some people? Of course it helps some people. They're spending so much darn money, but it empowers, enables, and usually benefits the terrorists as well. I guarantee you that's the reason we can't get the info. And they come up with these new reasons. There's always a new reason not to get information out of this gang. And I'm disappointed that Pam Bondi's Justice Department and Marco Rubio's State Department has a lawyer in court arguing against us. I mean, come on. I mean, it's one thing to be arguing in the Biden administration over this. I can't believe we're doing this now. Man, I'm so angry I can't even read the paper I got. Ex-USAID official says Biden ditched vetting reforms as his administration steered grants to terror supporters. That's from the the Free Beacon. Testified to Congress. I approve strong vetting policies for humanitarian assistance in countries swarming with terrorists. That too was ignored by the Biden administration, said this former USAID official. He added that vast sums of U.S. money have been diverted to fund terrorists in Gaza, Syria, Yemen, and Afghanistan. And NGOs have been hit with heavy fines for violating our anti-terrorism financing laws. And so they come up with new excuses to cover up what I believe is likely to what happened is that they gave a $7 million grant plus upwards of $20 million, $24 million, depending on how you count the numbers, to these Gaza recipients with little or no check as to what they were doing with it. Heck, the reason they don't want to tell us... Oh, here's the press release. Judicial Watch, USAID won't reveal aid recipients in Gaza. Marco Rubio, what's going on? You're now running USAID. Why are you allowing this to take place? Pam Bondi, you're running FOIA. You set the FOIA legal positions for the federal government. Your attorneys in the Justice Department, U.S. Attorney for D.C., they're defending the indefensible, coming up with new arguments to keep the American people from finding out what Biden was doing in Gaza. So they produce the records, USAID, but they just don't want to tell us any detail about where the money went to or who it went to. Let me go to the first batch, because you can see it better maybe in the first batch. Go to page... Go to page 2. Page 2 of 99 in the document batch. You see this? Acknowledge. That's the person who signed it. B6, privacy. See what else we got here. Go to page 21 and 99 in the PDF. Overhead management. They don't even want to tell us what the costs were for overhead. Okay, now go down further to page 35, 34 of the document. This is where the rubber meets the road in terms of information. All of this is basic information about who's being helped, who's the money being directed to, what's it being directed for. Let's go down one page. All of that, all of this is blacked out. Now, the government's very smart. There's $7 million. That's the initial outlay. They don't want to tell us anything. Total number of people affected in the target area, B4. Total number of unique people targeted, B4. How is that a secret? B4 is commercial secrets. These are nonprofits receiving money. What's the commercially protected information in a grant for charitable activity in a war zone? And this is the excuse they're using. They gave us what's known as a Vaughan Index. A Vaughan Index is a name given to what's called a privilege log, which lists the documents or lists the reasons, and it's designed to provide information to a requester for information as to what records they're withholding and why. So because we can't, they obviously, if they want to withhold records, they can't give us the records and then say you can't read them. That's not going to happen. So they have to give us some information so we can argue about it. And this is what they say. Parties to the conflict in Gaza have specifically targeted and killed aid workers, targeted relief agency operations, and targeted and destroyed health facilities and other civilian targets. Due to highly challenging and unpredictable operating environments for humanitarian operations, the exemption is required to protect the employees and beneficiaries of the NGOs working in Gaza from the harassment and violence. Disclosure of the name of the NGO would allow third parties to determine the identities of employees and beneficiaries. So they could give $1 trillion to Gaza, and under that new rule, which has never been imposed on any FOIA requester as best we can understand it, we've got a lot of experience, 30 plus years of doing FOIA. There's no one with more experience in this town than your Judicial Watch. USAID is saying we can't find out who they're giving money to in Gaza. Now, if that makes no sense to you, I'll explain to you what the reason is. When something doesn't make any sense in a government situation, it's almost always politics. So the Biden administration realized, oh my gosh, this is what I'm speculating based on my experience. The Biden administration realized, oh, we're going to get caught giving money to terrorist-related groups. So let's come up with a reason to hide the recipient. And for whatever, the Trump administration took the argument and is running with it and was arguing for that position in federal court today. So forgive me for being a little upset when the Trump Justice Department and State Department come in and argue for this outrageous secrecy. And I guarantee you, President Trump, if he knew, he'd be as outraged as I am. Rubio, would he be as outraged as I am? I think so. Pam Bondi would probably agree with me. And as far as I'm concerned, but people say, well, how can they know that? Well, they're supposed to know what's happening. Rubio and Bondi know, or should know what's happening. Secretary Rubio is now, I think, the acting head of USAID, practically speaking. And FOIA is a big deal. Certainly Pam Bondi knows FOIA. She's been involved in a FOIA controversy over Epstein. And it's not like we're not talking about it. I mean, I've been talking about this on social media, and Judicial Watch has, for weeks. if not months. We go to the social media feed, look at our tweets on Gaza and such, and people are upset that Judicial Watch is having to still fight for this basic information. Now, Judge Walton, he said he was perplexed by the government's position, citing commercial secrecy and privacy to hide information about who's getting money in Gaza. Never before used to keep this type of information from the American people, as I say, as best we can tell. And then, of course, then you have to fight about how much longer we want to fight about it. The government wanted to fight about it for 2 extra months. And we said, come on, we've been fighting about it for months. You wouldn't even come to an agreement with us about getting a schedule in place that allows us to vet these issues before the court. And now you come in and now you say you want an extra 2 months. So the court pared back the request. So it's going to be at least 2 more months before the litigation, these issues are fully briefed. But of course, what can happen in the meantime is that they can just release the information. Who are you giving money to? What are they doing with it? What's it for? It's not a state secret. So we get all these documents, right? Look at all these documents. And no information. Unacceptable. So I'll keep you updated. Hopefully the Trump administration changes its mind and releases this information and stops wasting our time, our resources, and the government's time and resources defending the indefensible. And if not, we'll just keep on battling in court to get the transparency about a Biden administration scandal that is now being defended by the Trump administration. Oh boy. Oh, look, I found some more USAID money, or grants. Another Biden administration scandal was the hijacking of virtually every government entity on behalf of extremist agendas on cultural issues during the Biden administration. I mean, they were obsessed with abortion, obsessed with transgender extremism and mutilation of children. It was really a crazy period, and it's one of the reasons the successor to the Biden administration, the Harris campaign, was rejected. The American people were uncomfortable about this. And there was this fanatic interest in the mutilation of children through transgender extremist surgeries and other things. And one of the poster child for that was Admiral Levine. I'm not going to use the first name because I'm not playing this gender game. And here's a picture of Admiral Levine, a transgender extremist. And so this person was obsessed with getting kids mutilated through operations that were largely irreversible. Terrible, terrible activity. And so Judicial Watch filed a FOIA request and then lawsuit for records about what Admiral Levine was up to. And it goes beyond the transgender extremism to something much more, or something as egregious. We've asked for the following information. We asked for the records of Levine and other officials regarding the removal of the minimum age for the treatment of children in the World Professional Association for Transgender Health Standards of Care. And that's a radical left-wing group that promotes transgender extremist mutilation of children and frankly adults. I mean, that process, so radical, so experimental, there's no way anyone can give informed consent for it. And the fact that any child or adult can engage in, well, maybe not any child, given the states trying to clamp down on it, and thankfully the Trump administration is trying to clamp down on it. But the fact that it's legal or ethical to do in anywhere in this world is a legal problem that needs to be solved, in my view. But of course, with the transgender extremism, it goes hand in hand with the other cultural extremism, especially on abortion. Now, I believe life begins at conception. It's not I believe, I acknowledge the biological reality, and I believe it deserves protection from conception on. Others don't. But I tell you, most Americans want some restrictions on abortion. Most Americans want some restrictions on abortion, and they reject the extremist view of abortion on demand for any reason. If you can get a doctor to do it, you can get an abortion up till the moment of birth. And the debating issue is they even support abortion. Of course, it's not really abortion after birth, but that's another matter. And we see this abortion extremism in these documents tied up with this advocacy that Levine was involved in. We've got 115 pages of records. It was just the first production, so more may be coming. As a result of our lawsuit against HHS, shows the Biden administration, this is the kicker, following the Dobbs decision which overturned Roe versus Wade, considered declaring a public health emergency so women could kill their unborn babies, and using federal lands to provide abortion services. So you thought federal lands were to provide mineral and energy wealth and for the American people. You thought federal lands were used to provide rest, relaxation, and protection of wildlife and the environment. No, the left wanted to use federal lands to kill the next generation of Americans through abortion. That's according to the documents we were able to uncover. Here are the 115 pages. The records include a briefing memo to Levine, which contains talking points for a meeting she was having with another left-wing extremist, Patty Murray, who's a Democratic senator from, where is she from? Patty Murray's Washington State. Office of the Assistant Secretary of Health. Her work, or Levine's work, in shared areas of interest. Long COVID, LGBTQI plus. I don't know what the plus means. What does the plus mean? Does anyone know? Reproductive health access. A section of the briefing memo entitled Public Health Emergency asks if an official public health emergency will be declared. A prepared answer says the Biden-Harris administration is never going to fight to stop fighting to protect access to abortion care. So maybe, right? The following question is, then says, what did the president mean when he said he directed his team to look into whether he has the authority to declare a public health emergency? And you said everything is on the table. What is that? What about federal lands? The prepared answer is the team has been evaluating every option, including a public health emergency. When we looked at declaring a public health emergency, we learned a couple of things. One is it doesn't free very many resources. For example, what's in public health emergency fund? There's very little money, tens of thousands of dollars in it. So yes, but they were worried they weren't going to be able to do much with it. And as it relates to federal lands, the answer says, this is again a prepared answer by the government of Joe Biden. As I've continued to say, we're exploring many options. However, we at HHS are not experts on public lands. So that's a big maybe. And then they talk about all the great work they're doing. And they talk about decarbonization of, oh, this is classic. Yeah, they wanted to decarbonize health care. Decarbonize health care. I'm not going to try to explain it to you. You can look it up. But that's insanity. That's how extreme, it's this transgenderism, crazed support for abortion on demand, and decarbonization. These leftists, it's like, they talk about, knee-jerk left-wing reactions. I mean, it's pro-abortion means being pro-transgender extremism, means destroying our civilization through decarbonization. And I've got 115 pages. I'm not going to go through them all, but I want you to read them to see what the Biden administration was up to last year or the last few years. The records contain an agenda for a trip by Admiral Levine to Florida. This is what she was doing in Florida, or he. A trans and non-binary youth event. So what the heck does that mean? Why is an adult going down to talk about sex with youth? A government official at the federal level. An appearance and photo op at the Pulse nightclub memorial site in Orlando. That was an area of a terrorist attack, actually that's good. I'm glad Levine went over there, because that terrorist attack has been buried because it was an Islamic extremist who did it, and the FBI could have stopped it but didn't. A meeting at a healthcare center in Miami to advocate for children under 5 to receive the COVID vaccine. So Admiral Levine, who is an extremist, is trying to give the COVID vaccine to kids under 5. Need I repeat the arguments over why that's a bad idea and controversial? A meeting with Miami's, quote, heat officer, unquote, who the agenda describes as the first position like it in the world to coordinate heat protection efforts for vulnerable communities. Now, hey, did you know, by the way, that cold kills more people than heat? There you go. A gender-affirming care trans health roundtable. Code for extremist transgender mutilation. A meeting and lunch with officers of Take VA Pride event. An event hosted by the Department of Veterans Affairs, specifically designed to celebrate and support LGBTQ+ veterans. And this is a classic. There's another event she attended down in Miami, it looks like. And this is the briefing. HHS under Biden is committed to using every tool in our toolbox to ensure health equity for all. That's communism, Marxism. This includes actions like NIH, National Institutes of Health, increasing funding on gender-affirming procedures, promoting extremist mutilation of children and adults, to further develop the evidence base for improved standards of care. It's an essential health benefit they want transgender extremist mutilations to be. As I say in our release, Admiral Levine and the Biden administration were quite simply obsessed with promoting the transgender extremist mutilation of children. the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, and quite frankly, law enforcement should do a thorough scan of what Levine was up to. Because misusing government money to promote dangerous procedures for children, that should be subject to investigation. So, I told you about the January 6th lawsuit we have against the DC police, where we are asking for the body cam videos of police officers from the District of Columbia, the Metropolitan Police Department here, from the January 6th incident. And they, for months, have told us, you can't have them, because they're subject, or they can be used, and the release could impact ongoing criminal investigations or law enforcement proceedings, which is bunk. Videos of police officers involved in doing police work are released all the time, long before enforcement proceedings are commenced, or even even contemplated, or even engaged in. So they're hiding the records from us. Now, when they insert law enforcement proceedings, it's kind of difficult to get over it, but we've been litigating it, and it had been resolved that we sued in the local court here in Washington, D.C., the Superior Court. So we went back to them after President Trump pardoned the January 6th defendants and those who were prosecuted, basically shut down the January 6th jihad against Trump supporters run by the Biden gang and a corrupt Justice Department and other government officials. And so in light of that, there's no ongoing criminal investigation. So we said to the DC Police Department, our lawyer, Michael Bekesha, did, well, do you have a change in position? So they come back to us and say, oh yeah, no more law enforcement proceeding, but we're worried about the privacy of people in these videos taken in a public space. And so we want to pixelate them, essentially just, blur out the faces. And you can't know who the police officers were who were involved. Why? I don't know. There's no privacy interest there that I think is legitimate. And not only that, but they wanted to charge us $1.5 million for doing it. Now, many people noted that sounds like extortion. That's like saying no. But do you think Judicial Watch should spend $1.5 million to get videos that don't show faces? That are public records? Of an event that happened 5 years ago, the biggest event we were told in the history of the nation? And this DC police government, this DC Police Department and the DC government refuses to turn it over to us unless we fork over $1.5 million in nonprofit funds? That's where we stand. I did a quick video on it, a little less angrily, earlier this week.
So Judicial Watch sued for the DC police body cam videos from January 6th. They didn't want to give us one video, practically speaking, because supposedly there were ongoing criminal investigations, which was an excuse as opposed to a reason. Then President Trump, of course, pardoned all the January 6th defendants and targets, so that excuse was thrown out the window. But then the DC government came back to us and told us we had to pay them $1.5 million to get access to the body cam footage from January 6th, which is an outrageous and exorbitant fee that's designed to prevent public access to videos that should have been released years ago. So we're going to keep on doing the heavy lifting, fighting in court. But clearly, the DC police has body cam videos on January 6th they don't want you to see.
So Judicial Watch has been suing in court for all sorts of January 6th material. We sued the we sued the Congress for access to the videos as a result of our litigation and public pressure. They released the videos. They're still hiding emails from that day, though. We've sued and obtained records about National Park Police, other responses to January 6th. We just sued over Mark Milley's involvement in January 6th. We exposed the CIA's involvement in January 6th. Did you know CIA was there on January 6th to provide response support? How did that work? And so now we have the basic body cam video of DC police officers there that day. When, DC police provided significant support during the disturbance. So there's a lot of video to be reviewed and disclosed to the American people. They say there's 1,000 hours, the government does. And so they told us they want $1.5 million. Now we have to figure out what to do. Do we negotiate for the money, negotiate it down? How much would we be willing to spend? Is there process to protect the so-called privacy of people that don't have really any privacy, any fair expectation of privacy? Do we challenge that? Those are all the issues that we have to kind of think through. But in the meantime, obviously, always the DC government can release the videos at any time. But this is what Judicial Watch, it's one thing to say, oh, release the videos. It's one thing to say, release the records, release the emails. It's a lot of heavy lifting to get literally the time of day from the government. Nothing is easy in this regard. And it's a remarkable testament to Judicial Watch's perseverance, persistence, expertise, and wide public support that allows us to do all this work, that we are able to get accountability, get these documents out there, get a hold of the fact that there are documents to be gotten, and at least fight about them in court in a way that results either in their release or an adjudication of what's withheld versus what isn't withheld. Much more so than Congress has been able to accomplish. You ask a member of Congress, they admire Judicial Watch, both the left and the right, for our ability to get this information. Here, this key January 6th information. If we want to pony up the money, we might be able to get some big videos out there in terms of what happened that day. We are in the lead again on this important issue, which is January 6th, an event which the left has used to try to destroy our constitutional republic by jailing their political opponents, including President Trump. So yeah, it's a big deal. It's not the big deal they think it is. It's a big deal because of their abuse and misuse of the event that day to abuse the civil rights of millions of Americans. And we're seeing that the January 6th videos, all of which could be released, there's clearly something there that the government doesn't want released. Otherwise, they wouldn't be trying to charge this abusive amount of money, $1.5 million, to Judicial Watch to get the records. So I'll keep you updated as we proceed. But, D.C., by the way, is a creature of Congress, constitutionally speaking. So it's fair to ask Congress, what are they going to do about this as well? We've been doing so much this past week. And what I love about Judicial Watch is like there are these scandals that pop up, and we just don't give up on them. We're like, well, that's interesting. The media may move on. Sometimes the public may forget about it because other issues pop up, but they're still interested in it. And we're like a dog with a bone. And accordingly, or to that end, we just sued the Department of Homeland Security for information on any Communist Party of China connections to Governor Tim Walz, who was the vice presidential nominee for the Democratic Party. You may recall he was a big fan of China. He went there repeatedly, all sorts of visits, and there were concerns that he was a target of Chinese intelligence. And so we asked the Department of Homeland Security, because there was a whistleblower who said there was a there in terms of concerns about this. So we wanted the details. He's the governor of Minnesota. He was a vice presidential candidate. The issue popped up because it's in the middle of a political campaign. No one thinks that, obviously the Biden administration is going to protect him. But we still have a right to know. And he's still a major political figure He may run for president again. That was the news this week. Or run for president the first time. I don't know if he's run before. So we sued back in October, or requested back in October the following records. All documents and communications in the Department of Homeland Security, Microsoft Teams group chat, and we provide some detail, referring or relating to Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, all intelligence information reports and regional intelligence notes related to Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and all requests for assistance or referrals to other federal agencies regarding Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. So this is about his China connections. That's what the reference is. On October 29th, same day of the request, so we saw it, we went, oh, we want these records. House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer said a Homeland Security whistleblower told his committee that Walz was a target of the Chinese Communist Party as someone they can get to D.C. The whistleblower also disclosed that officials from the DHS's Office of Intelligence and Analysis and Homeland Security investigations have been involved in the department's investigative and or intelligence work connected with the CCP, the state of Minnesota, and Governor Walz. So there's a whistleblower saying HHS has stuff, was investigating CCP connections, Communist Chinese connections to Tim Walz. So we asked for the records. And we've gotten the Heisman, right? And that's why we sued. Quite simply, there's a massive cover-up of what the deep state knows about Tim Walz's connections to the Chinese Communist Party. Secretary Noem, who is now the head of Homeland Security under President Trump, should quickly release any records in response to Judicial Watch's lawsuit. So do the search. Anything you find, respond to Judicial Watch and disclose it. Simple. Let us know what records there are. If you got to hide them for whatever reason, there are exceptions under law, I guess they can invoke. But answer our request. And last but not least, election integrity. Now, as I've explained to you before, and as you may know, Judicial Watch is the national leader in using the National Voter Registration Act to require states and localities to clean up the voter rolls. We've done it in California to the tune of 1.2 million names, New York City, nearly 450,000 names, here in Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Kentucky, Colorado. We have a lawsuit in California ongoing, a lawsuit in Illinois ongoing, a lawsuit in Oregon ongoing. So the states are supposed to be cleaning up the rolls in a regular way, and they're not doing it. And it's not a high bar. They just have to take basic steps. And Judicial Watch's litigation has led to the removal, just in the last 2 years or so, of 4 million plus names from the voter rolls. Dirty names that shouldn't have been there, should have been removed, were only removed as a result of Judicial Watch's litigation and other legal action. And another aspect of our work is being sure that the law is followed with respect to gaining access to the voter registration list. That means when we ask for the list and to find out what the states have been doing or localities have been doing in terms of maintaining the files to make sure they're taking out old names, people who die, people who move away, other ineligible names, that we're not denied. And what happens is certain states have passed laws to make it difficult to gain access to this information. And we've fought back and won in various states, such as Illinois and Maryland. Well, the problem in Utah is they still have a law on the books, Utah state law, make it difficult to gain access to records or even use them to get election integrity measures in place, such as cleaning up the rolls. and we sent a notice letter to the state of Utah saying this law is outside the four corners or what is allowed under the federal law, the National Voter Registration Act, because your voting lists are nearly impossible to get to for the reasons that I've highlighted here. Not only that, in Utah, they allow voters to keep their names off the voter registration list for alleged privacy issues. So we don't even know who's registered to vote in large measure as a result of that rule. And so Judicial Watch sent what is called a notice of violation letter under the National Voter Registration Act, pursuant to the rules that allow us to gain access to this information. And we asked Utah, take a look at your law. It's not appropriate under federal law. And if you don't fix it or take steps to resolve this issue, we can sue in 90 days. And we don't make idle threats. I mean, this is what we do under law to initiate the lawsuits I talked about already that have broken through the stone walls to gain access to voter registration data, and to not only that, clean up the voter registration list. Judicial Watch explains in our letter that the National Voter Registration Act was intended both to increase the number of eligible citizens who register and to protect the integrity of the electoral process and ensure that accurate and current voter registration rolls are maintained. It requires states to maintain for at least 2 years and make available for public inspection all records concerning the implementation of programs conducted for ensuring the accuracy of voting rolls. So our expert lawyers, we've got expert election law lawyers, the top in the nation, looked at Utah's registration law and found that it fails to ensure compliance with the federal record maintenance and public disclosure requirements and limits the public's ability to conduct reasonable election integrity analysis. The absence of necessary provisions in Utah's voter registration law directly contravenes the federal mandate under MVRA, we warned Utah in our letter. And here's the letter. We can pop the letter up on screen. You can't see it from here, but you can see it. There it is. So it was dated March 3rd. So they got 3 months from March 3rd to get their act together. In July of 2022, we settled a federal election integrity lawsuit against Illinois, requiring it to grant access to its centralized statewide list of registered voters. State officials had refused to allow the nonprofit Illinois Conservative Union and 3 lawfully registered Illinois voters to obtain a copy of the state's voter registration list, and despite their lawful request for those records under federal law. And so, in essence, we won. We settled and got access to the list. I think, if I recall correctly, in Illinois, they said, well, you can look at the list, but you have to go down to a computer terminal in Springfield. I'm going on memory here, but I'm close enough for government work. But you had to come down, you could look at each registration one at a time, which obviously is absurd if you're trying to figure out whether the lists are being maintained accurately and properly under federal law. In short, Utah law makes it impossible and even illegal to use voter registration lists to monitor for fraud and accuracy. This is at odds with federal law and undermines election integrity. Now, Utah is a Republican state, right? The left likes to think, oh, well, Judicial Watch, you're only doing this to help Republicans. No, we're doing this to enforce the law. So we go into Republican red states, Democrat blue states to enforce the rule of law on election integrity. And Utah is making it more difficult because of their law to ensure that the lists are being cleaned and as the law requires, which obviously mitigates against election fraud. I mean, the temptation to steal elections isn't just for Democrats. Hate to tell you this. Republicans sometimes steal elections too. There was an infamous case in North Carolina where a Republican consultant essentially messed with the election process in such a way a judge called for, had actually ordered a new election. In April 2020, this is the Judicial Watch's big Maryland victory, a federal court noted and gave credit to Judicial Watch. We have the resources and expertise that few individuals can marshal. By excluding these organizations from access to voter registration lists, the purpose of the federal law is undermined. The court ordered Maryland to produce complete voter registration records as requested to Judicial Watch. So, this is an important election integrity measure. I hope the Justice Department gets on the ball with this. I don't think Harmeet Dillon, who is the appointee for President Trump to run the Civil Rights Division that would be running election integrity, or a key place to have election integrity lawsuits run out of, I don't think she's been confirmed yet. She had her hearing a few weeks ago, and she was attacked over Judicial Watch's election integrity work, ironically, during that Senate hearing. But Harmeet is a great pick for to run the Civil Rights Division because she's truly committed to civil rights in a way the left isn't. And I know she's an election integrity expert and understands the rule of law is key to ensuring the American people have confidence in elections. So we're hoping that she comes on board and starts doing more election integrity work through the Justice Department because they've got the ability to do work that we can't do. But in the meantime, we'll do the heavy lifting, right? Like we're doing in Utah, like we aim to do in Colorado, in Oregon and California and Illinois. And we have another lawsuit, another big lawsuit coming as it relates to the counting of ballots that arrive after Election Day. We've got a lawsuit in Illinois about that. In Mississippi, our lawsuit there led to a Fifth Circuit ruling that counting ballots after Election Day is contrary to federal law, which sets an election day, not an election week. So there's another state we're going to sue over that within a few days. So when it comes to election integrity, Judicial Watch takes a backseat to no one on behalf of the American people who want elections to be as clean and honest under law as possible. So if you're aware of any other group in Washington, D.C. or nationally doing the work that I just told you about, tell me about them because I want to work with them. And you should support them too. But in the meantime, though, unless you find that group, and I don't think it's out there, you should support Judicial Watch. Go to our website at judicialwatch.org. Help us do the heavy lifting for clean elections, for upholding the rule of law, protecting the rule of law from the predations of the radical left, corrupt politicians and bureaucrats, exposing what the government's up to. Go to judicialwatch.org. Support us now. If you're already supporting us, I'll thank you. Thank you. But we need your help again, I can tell you. We can't stop. The left has unlimited resources, practically speaking. When we sue, we're not just suing some local, some individual who we can just roll over. No, we're suing the government. They can roll over us. And the only way we stand strong is with your support. Go to judicialwatch.org and join our movement, join our cause. God bless you, God bless America, and I'll see you here next time on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.